Hey folks, you're listening to The Idea Roastery. I'm Herman,
And I'm Jason.
and I'm running into a bit of a problem right now that you might be able to help me with, Jason. So I use RSS for everything. I'm subscribed to blogs, I'm subscribed to YouTube channels. I even have like an error log that shows up on my RSS feed. I firmly believe in the 90s vision of let's syndicate everything and browse the internet in a format that's under our own control. But unfortunately, not everyone got on board with that idea, and YouTube and sorry, Twitter and all these unified platforms popped up that don't really want you to leave platform because how else are they going to get ads?
I mean, that was like that was one of the second ideas I had for this topic.
Yeah, well,
Like,
RSS.
no, just like, is the internet getting boring?
Oh, right, right.
Because I think there's, yeah, like as you said, like everyone's inside of their little sort of ecosystem. But like, if you look at websites today, they all pretty much look the same, right? I don't know if you saw it, but there was some dude, I think it was on Twitter he did it for about a month or two. But what he did is he took like a million checkboxes and he put them all onto a web page and he like connected them together so that anyone who clicked like a checkbox would checkbox for everyone who was on the site. And so you had this thing where people were like checkboxing like different like things, and it was like this crazy like idea, and it's kind of reminds me a bit of like in the early sort of internet age where people were just doing like weird and like strange funny things online.
Yeah.
And there was a story this thread on Twitter of how he was like trying to like improve the web sockets because there were so many people going onto the site to check these little tick boxes. And then there's a couple of others like I think it was called a million pixels or something like that. I don't know
Hmm.
if you remember that kind
Yeah,
of
where they sold off pixels $1 each or something like that.
yeah, I think there's someone who's doing something similar where they're selling off like little like squares of their website which they're gonna host forever. For those who don't know, a million pixels was this guy who or person, I don't know if it was a guy or girl, but they sold 1 pixel on this website. And they said they're going to keep this website up forever. And then you had people like Coca-Cola, you had people like I think Disney or one of those people like buying like little patches.
Yeah, they sold
And
out and he
yeah,
made a
and he
million
sold it
dollars.
and made $1 million. I mean, that's the craziest of the internet. But you were talking
Yeah.
about RSS. Let's not diverge.
Well, while we're on this tangent, I saw someone make, you know how people are trying to get Doom to run on everything? They'll like
Mm,
have Doom run on your microwave oven, or I think someone got one running on a digital pregnancy test. I
mm,
saw a person who created a website that was also entirely pixelated but with checkboxes and managed to run Doom, like render Doom with checkboxes.
oh wow.
With my RSS feed, I'm subscribed to a bunch of YouTube channels that way. And this, I actually really like it that way because it means that I'm not berated by the recommendation algorithm trying to keep me on the website for as long as possible. And I just see the content that I am subscribed to. Now, the problem is that YouTube has recently, and when I say recently, I mean in the last year or two, introduced YouTube Shorts, which
Hmm.
is, for all intents and purposes, TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Now, as far as I can tell, there's no way to distinguish on the RSS feed between long form and short content. And
Mm,
so I have this one creator who I follow who's, exercise and sports scientist, really good content, really good information. And he releases about a video once a week, maybe twice a week. The problem is that he also releases about 2 to 3 YouTube shorts per day, which are
mm,
just very short excerpts out of
mm,
his longer form content. And I'm completely uninterested in any of those shorts showing up on my feed.
mm.
But I can't find a way to actually get rid of them. And I'm actually considering going and writing a little script that runs on my own server that takes in the RSS feed, checks for the length of the video,
Mm.
and cuts out any videos that are under a certain length because it just means like my RSS feed now says like, hey, you've got 3 new things today, and I go and I check it out, and it's just 3 YouTube shorts. Wow.
Yeah. I it could also be. I don't know if I haven't actually seen this features myself, but I think I've seen someone mention that you can now have auto-generated clips. So what it could be is like, when you upload a video, it like suggests like a bunch of auto-generated clips and then just like posts them out. So it could be something like that where it's not even like intentionally being done. Well, it's intentional because you want to draw in people into your channel, right? But it's not like curated content necessarily, which I guess is an interesting thing at itself, right? Because it's along with AI, like you could have just like one piece of content and it could generate like 10 other pieces of content that are like just snippets that are gonna draw people in.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast in the gym this morning, um, and they were talking about the relative difficulty it is to so they're all research scientists and they have a pretty good podcast. Um, the problem that they're experiencing a lot is that their podcast clips from their podcast regularly end up on TikTok with
Mm,
them saying, something. Let's say, for instance, they they would say like, um, uh, training muscles in a lengthened position is good for hypertrophy, for growing muscle, right?
mm,
And this would go onto TikTok and it would lose all nuance, right? So then
mm,
they would get berated for being wrong. But they're
mm.
like, no, if you listened to the hour and a half long podcast,
Yeah.
you'd get the nuance and the context over there. Um, the problem is that they've got orders of magnitude more viewers on TikTok than they do to their long form
Mm,
podcast. And I think
yeah.
this is just like a broader problem with the let's call it the influencer space, is that we've been trained to just want those like bite-sized clippets.
Yeah. One question I have is like, what is your process when it comes to choosing the people that you follow? Because I think part of that is like there is good information that's coming from some influencers, but what I've seen a few times recently is there's also like uh proxy influencers, right? So like I've seen a couple of places on Twitter, just like the main place I'm on at the moment, where someone's just copied someone else's content and then like it's like an interesting thing about ancient Egypt or something, and it's like actually just been like blatantly copied from someone else who's the
Mm.
real expert. And so you get almost like similar with the health, right? You get some influencers who are like talking about health, but they're not really health people. But I guess the sort of broader question is what is your process when you go to choosing uh, people to follow, right? Because there is a kind of choice there, right?
This is actually something that I've thought pretty hard about, and the a good rule of thumb for me is how upstream are these creators, right? So it's like
Mm,
um if we take, for instance, the fitness and health space, you've got, top marks, the people who are actually doing the research, like the actual sports and
yeah,
exercise scientists who have just completed a piece of research and they're talking about it because they are um not only right there on the ground doing the actual research and interpreting it as they will, but they are also the people who are the most in touch and also the most vocal about the limitations of their studies and how things could have been done
mm,
better, et cetera, et cetera. Is people think that r researchers go out and they say, like, here are some definitive truths. And that's not what researchers are doing at all. They're
mm,
saying, like, we speculate, or sorry, the data suggests that this may be good, right? But
mm,
you should probably look at, the large meta-analysis that will follow in a few years. Um,
mm,
and it's really let's call them the lifestyle influencers who are like, well, recent research, no citation, suggests
mm,
that taking a cold shower or using the sauna after exercise will blow up your muscles. And it's like, that is
mm,
definitively false. That's like
mm,
nowhere says that. But
mm,
I understand how you made that leap. It's like a game of broken influencer telephone where
Yeah.
everyone, the lifestyle influencers know that people want definitive and easy answers. And so the actual research scientists are really boring to listen to because they don't
Mm,
say anything provocative, because there's
mm,
actually very little provocative that comes out of actual research. So even the
mm,
stuff with which has been the big thing recently, which is that like lengthened partials. You know, you train your muscles in a long muscle length. Um, the research does mostly suggest that this is probably better for building muscle than full range of motion,
mm.
but like not by a lot, and it could be statistically insignificant, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But like everyone just went and ran with it. It's like I only train with lengthened partials now, um, which
Yeah.
is the incorrect way of interpreting that data.
Yeah, yeah. I think it, but yeah, I think there's okay when it comes to the influencer economy and like the whole practice in itself is that there is like a bit of a balance, right? Because on the one hand, like you and I know, like you can put out content and no one will see it, right?
Hmm.
Or like very few people will see it. So you kind of, because people are drawn to these like sort of fast hitting kind of dopamine infused pieces of content, it's almost like unless you like seek it out, like being like a research influencer or like a niche influencer, you almost got to like kind of be okay with like just putting it out there and not getting this reaction. And I think maybe that's one of the tells is like if there's like a monetary incentive behind what someone's doing, then that's probably a indication that it's there's probably some misalignment. I think one example that for me is like Huberman, and it could also like be the general trend, right? So I think in the past scientists and researchers were always like in their sort of uh, universities doing their research, but then no one ever publicized it, or it was published in journals and stuff. But the only people who read journals were other scientists, right? So it was kind of
Hmm.
like going on. And now you get people like Andrew Huberman who are like being a bit more vocal about what the research says, and it's making it more accessible for the layperson. But
Huberman
now
really toes that line of making definitive statements.
I think he's net good because he has made it. But I think, as you said, like research takes time, so it's almost like more recently there's like not enough content, almost like because he's already done
Mm,
like food and he's already done like some of the things that he's an expert in, and now he's getting some more researchers. But it's kind of like the field is like only so big, and
yeah.
maybe going super niche is like because I've listened to some niche health podcasts and I'm like completely bored by like 10 minutes in. It's almost like there's like at this point he's now got to figure out ways to sort of maintain his velocity, I guess, or maybe the incentive switches to more of like a
Mm.
sustaining monetary one. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on the growth.
I have a theory,
Yeah.
right? I have a theory that humans are sort of wired to look for silver bullets, for big provocative, like, oh shit, if you just do this one thing,
Mm,
it will change the game entirely. And I don't necessarily think it's just because we're lazy. I mean, like, yes, humans are, um, biologically energy saving machines, right?
mm,
Um, but I think it's also because throughout the vast majority of human history, every like every bit of information, every bit of novel information that we got was actually pretty revolutionary, right?
mm,
It's like, hey, something like if you do this, you will catch more fish, or if you do this, then you will get sick less often, and all those things. We've kind of gotten to that point with a lot of biology and science where the advancements made are very small, which is why you only rarely see them when you have huge sample sizes.
mm,
So if we use the whole sauna example, in order to see a benefit of sauna in the general population, you have to, put a couple thousand people in there and see what the effects are. And when they do that, what comes out the other side is a yeah, maybe there's like a 5% increase in certain health markers, but not for everyone, right? Um, but we as humans still want to hear that same like
Mm.
game-changing big
Yeah.
thing. So then Huberman, gives us that, and he says, "Yep, saunas are really good for longevity. Here's what I do." I also have no idea how much time Huberman has in his day because he'll be like, "Yeah, no, I get in and out of the sauna, 20 minutes in, 10 minutes out, 20 minutes in, 10 minutes out, 20 minutes in, 10 minutes out." I'm like, "Okay, so you're at an hour and a half so far." But that's also after his hour and a half long strength workout. And then later he goes for a run and then he's got his cold plunge and
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what's that guy who's trying to live forever in San
Yeah.
Francisco?
Is it Johnston or Brian Johnson? Johnston?
Yeah, Brian Johnston. He's like he's
Don't
actually
die.
doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Everything that he does is to live
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Um, but that's just my theory over there is that we're always looking for that big thing, and we just have those in very short supply at the moment.
Mm. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I think I think it is that it's good that there's now like a bit of a, a wider voice for this type of person because I think previously the influencers were mostly just like like people who are like big like in terms of like comedic value or like because they're like a movie star or like a
Mhm.
part of a boy band. Um,
Actually, that's a very good point that you have over there is that whenever I think influencer, I think research
yeah,
scientist, but I'm also like very much in the minority over here. Like the Kardashians are by far bigger
yeah.
than any research scientist out there. So if we shift the conversation a bit more towards like the age of influencers
Mm.
as non-nerds understand it. What are your thoughts around that? What do you think the impact is
So yeah, I think one of the stories that I thought about for this conversation is I don't know if you saw or if you've been following like is it MKBHD uh, like that dude?
I heard that there was a controversy recently about his app that
Yeah.
he released.
So prior to that, because he's got such a large following, and for those who don't know, which is probably like very little people, but he does like tech reviews, right? Which is kind of like
Of like iPhones
yeah,
and
iPhones and
Cybertrucks and
stuff. And
stuff.
I think he's quite well known for his like very juicy, like high quality, high definition video. Um,
Yeah.
but I think he did a couple of reviews for some cars. I think it was like the Fisker or something like that. And like
Okay.
it was like a really bad review for that car. And like the whole car company were like screwed after that because of
Yeah, I heard about that.
just like one
And also
review.
like the
Oh
Rabbit
yeah.
R1, which was definitively a bad
Yes.
product, but he pretty much like was the cause of that product completely
Yeah.
failing.
Um, I guess like yeah, I think some people think it's for one person to have that sort of swing, right? To be able to swing opinion in such a way. I think in a way it's good that you have people giving that sort of perspective. But I think like the way that it's can lead to people who aren't giving like a balanced point of view, right? So people who are providing
Mhm.
like saying they're an expert but not providing kind of a logical reason for what they're saying. It's kind of in the similar with the health influencers. They've taken a piece of content and they've like sort of manipulated it a little bit, but they're not actually providing it in a valuable way. And then people are just consuming it and sort of repeating it. I think there is some sort of nuance there in how people should view different types of influences in different ways, right? Because I think
And also be inherently skeptical about
yeah,
what it is that they say, because it's like there are huge financial incentives in multiple ways. The first one being like, I'm not suggesting that this is the case with MQBHD,
yeah,
Marcus Brownlee, or I think his name is, but um, very easily a company could have said, "Hey, recommend our product, and also don't
mm-hmm.
tell people that it's an ad,
Yeah,
and we'll pay you $5 million."
yeah,
And if many people were in his shoes in that instance, they'd probably take up that offer because it's really, really difficult
Mm,
to audit, right?
yeah. And
And then the yeah,
yeah, sorry, I was just going to add on to that. Like, I think like the incentives that they have is not, I think people originally from the original idea of YouTube is that you've got like revenue coming in from the ads that are played in front of your videos. Um, but I think that like people forget that now more and more there's these other forms of revenue which are like, paid placements,
sponsorship deals.
sponsorships. And so even and a lot of people thought, okay, well the big influencers definitely have this. But I think like looking into marketing recently and like doing a bit of research into SEO, it seems like it's also trickling down into like smaller influencers. So even people who have like
100%, man.
2,000, 5,000 followers could still be being paid to recommend a product. And you just see it as like, oh, this product is great. Like I use it. I think it felt a bit like that when people were talking about Cursor AI, like this AI code tool. I felt like that because it just seemed like everyone was kind of jumping on it at the same time, but no one was really providing like a sort of nuanced perspective on it. And so not that it was the case with that, but like there is a sort of marketing strategies that says go find like influencers with 5,000 followers, give them like $100 or like, $200 or whatever you think it's worth. And they just got to do a quick post about it. And that gets enough influence for people to
There
drive
are entire
sales.
agencies dedicated to that kind of thing. So I've actually done that with Just Sketch Me. Is I spoke to an agency, the agency would be in contact with, let's call it like 20 YouTubers on my behalf, and then they would do a sponsored section. And it's also why there's now legislation around having to explicitly say this is sponsored
Mm,
or this is an advertisement. And YouTube now shows the sponsored content inside of this post
mm,
because they're trying to disincentivize what looks like a valid recommendation, but it's actually a paid ad.
mm,
And I'm here for that. Like if you're advertising, that's perfectly fine. You've built an audience and you're trying to monetize it, but be honest that this is advertising and
mm,
not an actual recommendation. Um, but then there's a secondary problem, and this is very big in the more fitness oriented uh, uh, social media circles again, is there are people who explicitly take performance enhancing drugs and steroids and have had surgery and other things like that. And then they like start selling fitness supplements, right? And there's this implied assumption that I got real fit because I took, you know, Power 3000. And it's like, no, no, no. You took anabolic
yeah.
steroids, right? And so there's this disconnect between someone who consumes their content thinking, wow, this guy is fit and healthy, whereas he's actually not fit and healthy. He just took steroids,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So it leads to this sort of crafting of a lifestyle and uh, a physique that's completely unnatural, and selling that idea via using that idea to sell product. And you can kind of see this with like personal finance
Mm,
influencers as well, who will like rent Ferraris and
yeah.
rent expensive houses to give this allure that they have really, really made it.
Mm,
But what they're actually doing is they're trying to sell you on their course,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think I'm quite excited to see it grow, right? I think it is an interesting like sort of challenge that we face as we move to this more digital like online world, right? I think there's definitely more space for more. Like because we talk about like Huberman, we talk about a lot of these podcasters, but they're only like really coming out of the US, right? Like I was in Cambridge recently, and I'm like, is there a podcast that's like the Huberman of Cambridge or like the Huberman of UCT or there because there's not just research going on in the US, and albeit it's probably like the top research being done there, but there's also I think room for other sources of information. Um, and maybe it is the fact that because there's so few of them at the moment that it's kind of hard to corroborate like what is like trustworthy and what is not. unless you go in and like actually go into the details. I think the thing about influencers is it does, and it's just sort of like experts, right? Because you can have someone who's not like a deep expert, but it's almost like a proxy. Because I think if with information, if everyone's going to go like, like read the papers kind of for every single thing, it'd be very hard to get around. And I think maybe the what you were talking about with like having one kind of rule content is because people are trying to like sort of accumulate this in their mind as like, what must I do? What's going to be the best for me? And so having influencers is kind of good because it does at least dilute the jargon and the complexity into something that's useful. But with having so few, you kind of like limited to like one or two people within a specific domain, and then there's always a room for sort of a corruption because they've they're like the only source of truth for you unless you go to the
Yeah.
papers again, right? And it's kind of like a
So
ease of use, but as more people become available, it's almost like you can swap out influences, as it were.
yeah, if you think about it, this is the same issue that uh, that politics has, or more specifically that democracy has, right? Is that we are entrusting, in this case, information to these information disseminators, and we essentially vote for them by giving them views and upvotes and all that stuff. And there's this trust that we rely on, that we trust that they are not falsifying information or giving us information that has been paid for elsewhere. And the fact of the matter is that we don't there are select people who can go and they can fact check this, and then there's a public outcry and saying like, hey, this person is spreading nonsense. But the fact of the matter is that most of the people who fact checked these influencers do not have an audience as big as those influencers, so it doesn't really make a difference. So like, let's take for instance a politician goes and says something blatantly false, and we see this time and time again.
Yeah.
And then someone else says, like, hey, this politician lied. But no one cares.
Yeah.
And no one really hears this dissenting voice because politician A just has such a big
Mm.
following. I'm not pointing any fingers.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
um, but you could say the same thing about influencers, is that they will say things that are incorrect or they will be dishonest.
Mm.
And I think it's just down to you as the discerning gentleman to try and form your own opinions. I think that there are certain things that you can sort of litmus test to see whether someone is a bit more trustworthy, and that is where they essentially say like, "Hey, you know, check it out for yourself. I've given references and links,
Mm.
and I also make mistakes. And when mistakes are pointed out, instead of just doubling down, they come on, they say like, "Oh, yeah, I was actually incorrect in this instance,
Mm.
and you know, I am also learning.
Yeah.
I'm also human."
Exactly. I think also, yeah, people definitely forget about that aspect, and there is the opportunity, even just in, I mean, just in the way it's conveyed, right? Like the way that sometimes, like human will say, "This is what I do," and not "This is what you should do," and kind of the way that
Yep.
you interpret that is like this is like a definite rule that you have to follow. I think that remembering that people are like sort of human at the end of the day. I think also the you know following people who have some sort of credibility, although these days credibility is like it's a bit of a gray box because online,
Yeah.
I mean, unless you go and like I guess phone Stanford, or you could probably go onto their website and see that they at least are a researcher there, or they have some sort of niche. Um, then you could kind of at least have some of those kind of influences in your sort of communication stream, so that you can have some sort of almost trusting that it's okay. But even within research, like there's different perspectives on different things, right? And some people might influence, or they might emphasize something that's more towards what their research is saying versus another researcher who maybe believes that it's a different way
Yeah.
of doing it, right? And
I have another good rule of thumb, right? stop trusting what hot 20 somethings say, right?
Yeah.
Like I know that it sounds vapid on the surface, but it actually makes sense. Is that um when you're 21 and you're pretty or you know hot man,
Mm,
um you don't have the experience and the knowledge of someone who has been in the field,
mm,
et cetera, et cetera. I mean, like you barely have a university degree
yeah.
at 21, right? And if I instead said, like, do you trust someone who is just out of high school, or do
Mm,
you trust someone who's been working in the field for a decent period of time? The thing is that people in our incredibly visually oriented social media
mm.
landscape are more likely to trust person who they aspire to look like rather
Yeah.
than person who actually studies this shit. And the fact of the matter is that when you're 21, you can just like walk past some weights and put on muscle,
Mm,
and you don't have to worry. Like, um, here's a similar question. Uh, do you take advice about dealing with depression from someone who has just been perfectly happy and fine their entire life and never like had anything bad
mm.
or depressing happen to them? Or do you take depression advice from someone who has struggled consistently for many years and found ways to cope with it? Um, and I think that's a good
Yeah.
way to balance that.
I just had a an interesting idea, right? So I think if you think about the past, right, the history, like back in the day, you used to have, well, in tribal communities, there used to be elders, right? So I'm thinking,
Yeah,
so in
yeah.
a sense, we if there's not already these people that exist, these are the elders of the 21st century, right? So,
And the elders back in the day were
yeah.
like 45 to 55 year
And I'm
olds,
actually think
right?
I'm thinking once we hit 40, we're gonna change the name of this podcast to the elders.
The elders. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that.
Because it's almost like this old, yeah, because a lot of the knowledge came from like people who were experienced and sort of had seen a lot of things, right? And they knew kind of what was right and wrong, and then they were able to impart that knowledge onto sort of the younger generations. And so maybe that's, why it's such a innately interesting concept when it comes to influencers, is it's kind of like mimicking this passing down of information. What's the most important stuff to remember to, be successful and be, a better person, I guess. But yeah, that was just a
Mm.
weird kind of like side tangent.
If you think about it, the term influencer is actually it's accurate, but it's also a pretty terrible definition or a terrible name. Like we've come to associate influencer to be like, oh, person who's social media and has a lot of followers. But the core root of the word is someone who changes the way that you think or do,
Mm,
right? And if you think about it in that context, it's like not that nice.
yeah.
Right? It's like a a manipulator,
Well, I
a
think,
thought
yeah,
manipulator.
because I think it can be and sometimes it can be intentional and sometimes it can be unintended from the person's
Mm,
perspective. Because if you're quite new to the influencer social media lifestyle, you might be just putting out content that you think is like quite valuable. It might have subtle like incorrectness, or it might not go, it might not have like the robustness of like a full length sort of paper, right?
hmm
And so you might just be making mistakes and not even know it, right? And I guess it's kind of like, I guess it's up to the internet and whatever medium you're on to kind of like raise a counter arguments against things if it is incorrect, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's,
S-
yeah.
s- So to end off, I have a little story for you on um when I was, I'd say it was around 2014, 2015. Uh, I knew you at the time. Remember, I was dating a Swedish girl
Mm,
for a bit.
yeah.
So her and her friend had this idea of creating a platform that linked influencers to companies who wanted to do influencer marketing.
Mm,
And at the time, influencer marketing wasn't really a thing. I mean, like it's always been a thing from your, TV, whatever, but like social media influencers wasn't really a thing yet. And they had this big idea that they wanted to link up companies and influencers, and that'd be this exchange of money, and they'd get a cut. And they asked me if I'd, build the technology for it. And they offered me equity and bibbity boppity boo, and I'm like, ah, it's cool. I'll just help you, get this thing up and running, like website, whatever. And I realize now, yeah, it didn't work out for them because they didn't really have a good tech partner, me. Um, but I realize now that they were really onto something,
yeah.
and there are currently agencies doing exactly
Mm,
that are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars in just fees
mm,
every year. And if they had gotten it right, it would have been one of those first mover advantages.
mm,
But at the time, I didn't understand it at all. I'm like, who's going to buy things because of a recommendation of someone who they follow on Instagram?
yeah.
That's silly.
Yeah.
And now you just see it happening all the time, everywhere. It's now the fastest growing and possibly one of the biggest
Mm.
forms of marketing.
It's
Um,
yeah. It's crazy,
yeah.
and also around London, it's a little bit more obvious because I guess more density. But like sometimes you just see like the places like closed down because there's an influencer going there and they're going to record and they're going to do like a post and that's going to boost the sales of that pharmacy or whatever they go into. It's kind of
Yeah.
almost like it's scheduled in, right? Like we've got this person coming, and it's part of like the marketing idea. But I guess it's still quite nascent. I think the maybe the higher end influencers, it's probably maybe already established, and I wouldn't be surprised if like YouTube and some of these platforms are kind of doing something similar like to that. But yeah, I think on the lower end, niching into your country, your sort of specific domain, it's probably still an opportunity there to do
There,
something
no,
like this.
that's being fully taken advantage of. So it's like when I worked with this other agency that did YouTuber collaborations, we explicitly worked with smaller channels.
Mm,
So things from 5,000 to 50,000 followers,
mm,
because they had the best return on investment.
mm.
Because as soon as they have larger and larger audiences, it becomes more and more expensive per impression.
Yeah,
Um, and whereas someone who's got 15,000 followers is happy to make a post for $50.
yeah,
But as soon as you've got a million followers, well, you're not going to make a post for anything less than,
yeah, yeah,
$1,000.
yeah.
Um, and so interesting economics over there.
Mm,
It also depends on the industry that you're in. So it's like, um, if you're inside of education, hey, listen, that's so cheap because, you know, educational products
yeah,
are difficult to sell and
mm,
have like
yeah.
heavy churn, except for Brilliant. I see Brilliant advertising everywhere. So forget what I just said.
Yeah, I guess if you're paying for like a course, right, and like the course is quite a lot of money, or a subscription, they must have like a lifetime value in there. So yeah, but anyway, it's interesting to see it, and I think it will be a
There is actually a whole industry around creating products for influencers to sell as their own product. So they'll be like, "Hey, you can download my app." But you know that they didn't develop
yeah,
the
yeah,
app. Is a company went to them and they said, like, "Hey, we've got this app that you can white label and sell it as your app to your influencers. We'll just take a share of the profit,"
yeah.
or something like that. So I'm interested to see where this goes, but
Mm,
I actually like I'm not on social media just
I
because
know.
it gets tiring, and it's been a while since I've had a YouTube video not tell me that their post is sponsored by
Yeah,
X, which I'm actually here for because it means, or I don't know if it actually means this, but it potentially means that they are explicitly stating this is a
mm,
sponsored post. Here's the advertising. Okay, now we're not going to be advertising other things to you hidden inside of our
yeah.
content.
I think yeah, because it's important because if you I guess if you're a YouTube, right, like, and you show an ad for a competitor that right before someone like recommends something in their video, it's gonna make it a little bit like annoying for
It
the
won't it
marketer.
won't be it won't be very
Yeah.
nice.
Anyway, yeah, nice chat.